As we get closer to the NFL draft, we're going to take time to look back at some of the players that this regime replaced from the last and why it points to things being done a little bit better these days. That and more on today's episode of Locked On Commanders.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome inside today's episode of Locked On Commanders. I am your host, David Harrison, your friend, your eyes, your ears on the ground, covering the Washington Commanders for a couple of outlets: Sports Illustrated's CommanderGameDay.com, WUSA9.com, locally, and of course here for you on the Locked On Podcast Network to add to those couple of written outlets. I want to thank you for coming through today. On this episode, we are going to discuss the importance or the possibility of the Washington Commanders going and getting their guy in this year's NFL draft. We're going to talk a little bit more about new left tackle Laremy Tunsil and his penalty problem, see if we can't narrow down a little bit of the root of those problems. But we're going to start it all off by taking a comparative look from the last regime's draft picks to this regime's draft picks and moves, and kind of see if we can kind of see where this team is doing things just a little bit better these days. Every day, or those of you who come through for every single episode, I want to thank you for coming through for today's episode as well. If anybody out there is not already, please subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you are listening to this episode right now. And if you're new to the show, thank you for coming through. Thank you for finding the show. Locked On Commanders is a daily podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Hopefully you like what you hear or see and you come back again for more. This episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Continuing our week's mailbag, right? We wanted to catch up on some mailbag questions because we didn't have one during the first week of free agency. Obviously, a lot of news, a lot of moving pieces. We did a lot of live episodes during that time. Wanted to come through here and get through the mailbag. And we've got this mailbag question that really doesn't pertain to free agency this year specifically, but really kind of wants to speak to how this new regime is doing business, what they're doing differently from the last regime, and some evidence of why it's working already in year number one. And obviously, trip to the NFC Championship game is evidence enough that this thing is working in a better direction. But as we get into the weeds of this thing, we'll see this team, even with some players that maybe don't move the needle 100%, they're making solid decisions across the roster, even if they are somewhat tough decisions. And that came from Cam, who said it would be cool to do a Ron Rivera first, second round draft pick comparison. Where are they now? Kind of see where we can build some more confidence around this new regime led by general manager Adam Peters. And I don't want to turn this into a Ron Rivera bashing session. That's not what we're here to do. But of course, we are talking about Ron Rivera picks as the coach / GM decision maker guy here in Washington since he got here in 2020 till he was, fired after the 2023 NFL season. Then Adam Peters coming through. Now, I don't want to. I expanded the scope a little bit. Day one, day two. So we're going first, second, third round picks here for both regimes. Day 1 and 2 picks from Ron Rivera that were still on the roster when Adam Peters was hired. Right. This is important for the timing. When Adam Peters was hired, 10 of Ron Rivera's 12 day 1, day 2 picks were still on the Washington Commanders roster. The two that weren't were 2020 day 1 and day 2 picks, Chase Young and Antonio Gibson. Defensive end Chase Young, running back Antonio Gibson. Now, the day 1 picks that were still on the roster when Adam Peters was hired: linebacker Jamin Davis, wide receiver Jahan Dotson, cornerback Emmanuel Forbes. Day 2, offensive lineman Sam Cosmi, cornerback Benjamin St-Juste, wide receiver De'Ami Brown, defensive tackle Fedarian Mathis, running back Brian Robinson Jr., defensive back Quan Martin, offensive lineman Ricky Stromberg. 8 of those players made it to the active roster, right? 8 of those 10 players made it to the active roster. The 2 that didn't, Jahan Dotson, who was traded to the Philadelphia Eagles in August, and Ricky Stromberg, who was released in August 2024 on an injury settlement. 3 of those 8 players that did make it to the active roster were released in season. Those guys being Jamin Davis, Emmanuel Forbes, Fedarian Mathis. That means that only 5 made it to the end of the season. 3 of those 5 remain on the current Commanders roster. Offensive lineman Sam Cosmi, who got an extension during the 2024 preseason from Adam Peters, running back Brian Robinson Jr., and defensive back Quan Martin. One of them has been assured of a future with the team. That is Sam Cosmi, who obviously got his extension. So clearly this new regime sees him as a part of this team's future, even though he comes from the previous regime. That is a 8% hit rate. Not a very high hit rate from the previous regime's day 1, day 2 picks as you look at it moving forward. Of Adam Peters' 6 day 2 picks, he only had 1 draft, yet he's already got half of the amount of day 1 and day 2 picks that the previous regime had from 2020 to 2023. So a lot of day 1, day 2 picks for Adam Peters. All 6 were on the active roster to start the season, of course, because no GM releases his own day 1, day 2 picks, at least not usually. I'm going to go with 2 of them have a surefire history or future with the team, I should say. Quarterback Jayden Daniels, clearly, as we speak right now, has a very, very bright future with the team. And cornerback Mikey Sainers still. Brandon Coleman was close to making that list for me, but I want to be a little bit strict here. I almost want to put him there, but I need to see what happens in year 2 first. Obviously, he's not going to play left tackle. We assume he's going to play right tackle. I know some of you are holding out hope that you want him at guard and maybe he'll move into guard. Whatever the Commanders decide to do with him, I'm going to hold out judgment on if he's a surefire, has a history with the team or a future with the team type of guy until after we see what happens there. Johnny Newton, Ben Sinnott, although personally I think Sinnott's upside is really, really high. Just obviously we haven't been able to see a lot of it. Luke McCaffrey, they're all up in the air right now, which is fine after just 1 season, right? Still, even with the 2 of the 6 being guys that I would say have a clear future with this team, that's a 33% hit rate so far for AP on day 1, day 2 picks in only 1 year. Now, to be fair, after 1 year of Ron Rivera's picks, a lot of people thought Chase Young was going to be the next great NFL edge rusher in 2021. So this is all very much still a work in progress, but we can only look at it where we can look at it, which is today. Now, when comparing the 5 day 1 and 2 picks that Adam Peters replaced before the 2024 NFL season, Ricky Stromberg, Jahan Dotson, Jamin Davis, Emmanuel Forrest, Federi Mathis. Those were the 5 that were on the roster when they began the season, training camp, all that stuff. When you look at who Adam Peters replaced those guys with, Michael Dieter, Noah Brown, Dante Fowler Jr., Mikey Sanderson, and Sheldon Day, this new regime made very good decisions. This wasn't simply just, I'm going to get rid of their guys and keep my guys or get my guys, right? And Dan Quinn talked about this during the season. He said, listen, every commander is my guy. It doesn't matter if they were signed by me, signed by Adam Peters, drafted by Adam Peters. If they weren't brought in here before I got here, it doesn't matter. They're all my guys. And I love that approach, right? But honestly, for me, and this is only for me, this only exists in the David Harrison Locked On Commanders, Sports Illustrated Commander Game Day WSA 9 stratosphere. To me, they're not your guys, quote unquote, until you re-sign them, right? So Sam Cosmi or extend them, right? So Sam Cosmi got a new deal. I would say that's a Dan Quinn, Adam Peters guy. Now, Jeremy Reeves was brought back. He was a pending free agent. Tress Way was brought back. If you're just keeping a guy because he's on contract and, it's easier to keep him than ship him out, to me, that's not necessarily your guy. He could still be your guy, but until you give that guy a new contract, to me, I'm just not going to put him in that category for our conversation purposes here. So Michael Dieter, guy brought in by Adam Peters and Dan Quinn, replaces Ricky Stromberg, not a guy brought in by Adam Peters, Dan Quinn, right? So there's a correlation. Dieter appeared in 17 games. Stromberg, currently with the Bears, appeared in no games last year. So it's not like and the reason we're comparing these is not to, again, bash anybody, but it's just to show you that while the Washington Commanders made a move and some fans maybe didn't love all the moves or love all the ejections of some of those guys, the NFL is basically showing you that this regime made the right decision in replacing these players. Noah Brown came in, towards the end of the preseason, missed some time due to the injury that he had when he first got here, but he appeared in 6 fewer games than Jahan Dotson did. Jahan Dotson traded to the Eagles, yet he had 16 more regular season receptions than Jahan did, 200 plus more receiving yards, and 1 touchdown compared to Jahan Dotson's 0 touchdowns. And of course, that touchdown, just as Chicago Bears fans, very, very impactful touchdown. Dante Fowler Jr., who I'm putting down here as replacing Jamin Davis. Now, I know Jamin Davis, off-ball linebacker for the old regime. Dante Fowler Jr., outside linebacker. Jamin was moved outside linebacker, so you could maybe go Bobby Wagner. Honestly, no matter how you cut it, obviously they made a good decision in replacing him with whoever they replaced him with. Here I'm going Dante. Appeared in 17 games compared to 9 games that Jamin appeared in, which 5 of those appearances were for Washington. 4 of them came from Minnesota. Jamin only recorded 1 sack all season. That came with Minnesota, 12 tackles, while Fowler led the Commanders in sacks with 10.5, forced 2 fumbles, along with a pick 6 to go with it. So obviously Dante Fowler Jr., the better decision. Mikey Sanders still straight up took over for Emmanuel Forbes while they were on the same team. Forbes played in 2 games for the Rams, started 1, had a PBU, and made 5 tackles. Mikey Sanders still All he did in year one was become a leader on the team and carve himself out quite a niche there with the Washington Commanders defense. Sheldon Day, both Sheldon Day and Fedarian Mathis appeared in 12 games in 2024. Neither of them had a sack, but Day had 4 more solo tackles and a QB hit. Both had 2 tackles for loss. And of course, Sheldon Day, 30-year-old journeyman, Fedarian Mathis, young second-round draft pick. The expectations are obviously incredibly different. Mathis was claimed by the Jets after being released by the Commanders in December, but did not make an in-season appearance for them. He is still currently on the Jets roster. Of those replacements, only Dante Fowler Jr. not with the Commanders anymore. He's back with the Cowboys. Dieter probably going to have competition in camp. Noah Brown is going to lose snaps this year to Deebo Samuel. Mikey might move back inside. Sheldon Day's back on the roster, but likely looks a rung lower on the depth charts than where he finished last season. So even those replacements are potentially going to get replaced in some way, shape, or form this following season. So it just kind of adds another layer to where this roster was before Adam Peters arrived to where it is now. Where are the rest of those Washington Commanders? Just for those who are curious, Chase Young just signed a new 3-year deal this offseason to stay with the Saints. It's worth up to $51 million. $17 million of it is guaranteed, a little over $5 million per year in guarantees. And with how it's structured, it's basically a 1-year deal because if the Saints keep him for that second year of that deal, he'll count towards $20.5 million of their salary cap next season. Pretty steep, to be quite honest with you. Career high for sacks in the season is still 7.5, which he did for Washington his rookie season, and he did it again in 2023, split between the Washington Commanders and the San Francisco 49ers. Antonio Gibson just got married, so congratulations to AG. He's entering his second year of a 3-year deal with the New England Patriots that he signed last offseason, started 3 games for the Pats in 2024, finished with 744 total scrimmage yards, the second lowest output of his career behind 2023 in Washington. Benjamin St. Juste just signed a deal to play for the Chargers next year. De'Ami Brown is now with the Jacksonville Jaguars. And finally, the Philadelphia Eagles are projected to decline Jahan Dotson's 5th-year option. So there's enough evidence on the table. Again, NFC Championship game alone kind of shows you, right? But for those who need that kind of deeper dive, you don't necessarily like all the players being shipped out, all that stuff. There's a reason for it. And the rest of the NFL, quite honestly, is telling you that those players were not necessarily up to snuff. So coming up next, we're going to talk about Laremy Tunsil, one of the newest additions to the Washington Commanders roster. One of the big problems on his resume, penalties. How can Kliff Kingsbury or Jayden Daniels potentially help him solve those problems? That's next, coming up on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you in part by Upwork. Scaling your business requires the right expertise at the right time. With Upwork, you can find specialized freelancers in marketing, development, design, and more. Experts that are ready to help you take your business to the next level. Upwork gives businesses flexibility by connecting them with top freelance talent across multiple industries, including IT, AI, web development, and marketing. So whether you need extra hands for a project or a long-term partner, Upwork makes hiring simple and affordable. If you need help with a marketing campaign, Upwork can connect you with a freelance expert who delivers incredible results. Posting jobs is free and it's simple, and within a day, you'll get multiple qualified candidates to choose from. So visit Upwork.com right now. Post your job for free. That's UPWORK.com. Upwork.com to connect with top talent and grow your business today. Today's episode of Locked On Commanders is also brought to you in part by Monarch Money. If you ever checked your bank account and wondered aloud or internally, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, entertainment, it's easy for everybody to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in. It's your personal CFO, Chief Financial Officer, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. But Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. That would be grossly disrespecting what it really is. What it is a complete financial command center. And I got to tell you, after using it for a couple weeks now, that is a great way of looking at it. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending all in one place. So you stop just managing your money and start building a little bit of wealth. You get to use Monarch. You realize just how much food you spend on or how much money you spend on food deliveries, things like that. I'm really guilty on that. When you get to see it, I'm telling you, it hits just a little bit different. Instead of juggling multiple apps to do all this, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track your spending, and even plan your long-term goals. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com to get 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. Continuing now with one more mailbag episode to wrap up the week here at Locked On Commanders. And insider Tia came through and asked, can Kliff Kingsbury control some of the penalties? Laremy. For those of you who don't know, Laremy Tunsil in 2024 committed 19 penalties, the second most in a single season in his entire career. He had 20 in 2019. That's the second most. But it's also only the second time he's ever gone over 12 total penalties, right? So I don't know that we should necessarily hit the panic button or anything like that. You know what I mean? It kind of seems like a 1 or 2 off maybe, but I did want to dive just a little bit more into the data to kind of try to answer Tia's question as best as possible on how much Kliff Kingsbury can really affect things. Now, for what it's worth, Laremy also had no penalties in 2 playoff games last year. He's only had 4 career penalties in 7 playoff games. So when it matters most, it does look like Laremy Tunsil tends to lock in just a little bit better. So in the 2024 regular season, Tunsil had 13 more penalties than any other Texans player in 2024. Because I came into this thing and I'm like, well, the entire Texans offense probably struggled with penalties, and the entire offensive line probably struggled with penalties. Laremy Tunsil struggled with penalties at a rate that no other Texan did in 2024. He stalled 11 drives personally. That's 58% stall rate. 11 of his 19 penalties stalled out drives, 58% stall rate, very high. Compare that to Sam Cosmi, who had the most penalties on the Commanders team last season with 12 of them. That stalled 4 drives. It's a 33% stall rate compared to 58% stall rate. So not only did Laremy Tunsil get a lot of penalties, they came at really bad times. And during his introductory press conference, Laremy Tunsil wasn't asked directly about the penalties, but he did bring them up himself, kind of unprovoked, and said he's got to fix that. So Laremy Tunsil also very, very much aware of the penalty situation, very much planning on fixing it. Now, as we break this down, 12 of his 19 penalties were false starts. So how can that be impacted by Kliff Kingsbury? We're going to get to that here in just a second. I want to give you the entire breakdown. 3 of his penalties were illegal formations. 2 of them were holds. 1 was an ineligible man downfield. 1 was an unnecessary roughness penalty. Now let's get to the false starts again. So 12 of his 19 penalties in 2024 were false starts. Kliff Kingsbury, how can he impact that? Well, it's kind of schematic, right? When you look at his history for Laremy Tunsil, Houston was called for 24 false starts total. We know half of those were by Laremy Tunsil. Still, there were 12 other false starts by the entire rest of the line. Only 13 of the Commanders' false starts last year were by O-line players. So the Commanders already had a more disciplined offensive line, really, than the entirety of the Houston Texans offensive line, because even those 12, which is 1 fewer than the entirety of the Commanders offensive line, you're also taking a player out of the equation. So that's 12 amongst 4 O-linemen versus 13 among 5. It's fairly even, but it comes out in favor of the Commanders. So the Commanders already have what would look like a better established offensive line practice. So hopefully that's going to come into it as well. Now, looking at scheme, look at Laremy Tunsil's history. In 2016, he's a rookie and he's a guard. Only 2 false starts, but he's a guard. 2017, his first year as a tackle, quarterback Jay Cutler, offensive coordinator Clyde Christensen under Adam Gase's offense in Miami. That number goes up to 8 false starts. 2018, it comes down to 3 false starts. His second year playing tackle in Adam Gase's offense, it goes down to 3 false starts. As a vertical type offense, Adam Gase tends to run there. That's significant. 2019, he goes to Houston with Deshaun Watson at quarterback, Tim Kelly's offensive coordinator, Bill O'Brien. It's his offense. 12 false starts. That number goes back up. 2020, second season with Deshaun Watson under Bill O'Brien for part of that season, goes down to 4 false starts. He's a little bit more comfortable, right? A lot of empty sets, obvious passing situations, gives defenses the ability to know when to rush the passer better. To me, that kind of speaks to the uptick, 12 false starts in 2019, and then comfortability with it, more familiarity with it, brings it back down to 4. 2021, Tim Kelly is still there as the offensive coordinator, but to run more of a West Coast type of offense. Davis Mills is the quarterback, no false starts. That's an amazing season. 2022, Mills is still the quarterback, but now Pep Hamilton is the offensive coordinator running his quote-unquote no-coast offense that emphasizes running the ball a lot, but also does some other things. 7 false starts, so the number goes up just a little bit more. 2023, Bobby Slowick comes in. First year under Bobby Slowick, 7 false starts. Second year under Bobby Slowick, 12 false starts, just like we just talked about. And as we know, the confidence in Bobby Slowick and the relationship between Bobby Slowick and the quarterback started to deteriorate. I'm not trying to make excuses for Laremy here, but if the OC and the quarterback are not seeing eye to eye and they're not on the same page, the entire offense is going to be out of whack. Again, not excusing it, but it is a factor. Precision timing-based offense by Bobby Slowick relied less on the ground game, more on the passing game in 2024, while the offensive line talent overall also suffered. So looking at that, basically what it tells me, just looking at the surface, is that Laremy Tunsil does better in vertical-based offenses, and the more experience he has with the quarterback and the OC and the system, the better. Now, there's nothing you can do about that in year one with the Washington Commanders, but at least you see Laremy now returning to a more higher-paced, faster-paced offense, I should say, that likes to run the ball, but also likes to push the ball downfield where he seems to have been better in the past. So that's kind of how maybe Kliff Kingsbury's scheme can impact things. As far as the illegal formations, the second most penalty that Laremy was called for, illegal formations, I'll tell you right now, he's a veteran. He needs to know how to line up, where to line up. Yes. However, the quarterback is also responsible for that. Jayden Daniels taking charge, saying, hey, Laremy, scoot your butt up a little bit, get even with that center's belt line, whatever it is that he needs to do will help that as well. So very good question. I can't tell you, ABC here, the 4 steps that Kliff Kingsbury, offensive line coach Bobby Johnson, or quarterback Jayden Daniels are going to take to make sure Laremy doesn't have 12 false start penalties this season. But I can point to some historical facts in Laramy's career and also just the way the game is played to say that maybe they won't be as bad. I would probably project 7 or 8 false starts from Laremy Tunsil this season, just given the history, first year in the system as he gets to learn Jayden Daniels' cadence and Kliff Kingsbury's offense. To wrap up this mailbag episode, I'm going to tell you who I think the Washington Commanders should have their eyes on in a trade-up scenario in this year's NFL draft. That's coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the bracket breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
Wrapping up this week's mailbag episode, or this week of programming, with another mailbag episode, our second mailbag episode of the week. Insider Merle came through and said, insiders are always talking about trading back in the NFL draft. Is there a player Washington would trade up for? Ravi also, kind of a combo deal here. Ravi also came through and said, what do you think the chances are for a draft day trade, whether trading back or trading for another player? So who could they trade up for? Well, we kind of had this conversation at one point here during the offseason already. And I think the highest that I could see the Washington Commanders potentially trading up to would be number 15 with the Atlanta Falcons. And that is if there's just a dude Adam Peters has got to have. Number 15. According to the latest mock draft by NFL.com's Chad Reuter, he did a 4-rounder, 3 quarterbacks go in the first 7 picks, 2 tight ends go in the first 14 picks. And that is great because that's 5 picks that you're basically not looking to spend a first-round draft pick on. So it basically drops you from 29 to 24, right? So now you're kind of in that early 20 range. And when you hear people talk about this year's first round class, they kind of say after the early 20s, the top end talent kind of seems to go away. So if you're already basically looking at number 24, relatively speaking, with the players that you would actually select, all you need is a couple teams to kind of go sideways here and draft a dude that maybe isn't really up that high up there on your board, stuff like that, to drop some talent into your lap. Now, linebacker Jahad Campbell in this mock draft out of Alabama goes number 15 to the Falcons. He is a guy that we've talked about before. I have actually mocked him to the Commanders at number 29 before. However, he's a guy who's also, depending on who you're talking to, ranges from the early teens to the 20s to sometimes the late 20s. So it just depends on how much you love him. He's kind of a tweener, does have off-ball linebacker ability, but he's going to come into the NFL, most think, as an edge, more of an outside linebacker. The Commanders don't really need another outside linebacker. They run with basically Frankie Luvu as the main, and then Dante Fowler got his 500 or 600 or so reps last year, split between being a down lineman DN and a stand-up outside linebacker. So do you need to trade up to go get a new Dante Fowler Jr., maybe younger and better? Not necessarily, so I don't think you're going to go there. Now, the first player I see coming off this board in this mock draft that I could talk about the Commanders trading up for would be cornerback Jayden Barron. And Jayden Barron kind of reminds me of Quinyon Mitchell last year. Last year, I was one of the first that I know of to be like, hey, this Quinyon Mitchell kid from Toledo, pretty stinking good. I think people are sleeping on him a little bit. Next thing you know, Quinyon's getting top 10 conversation, and I'm like, all right, maybe people aren't sleeping on him as well. Jayden Barron, if you go back to our first mock draft Monday, I had him going to the Commanders number 29. Jayden Barron is now number 16 in this mock draft, going to the Miami Dolphins via a trade with the Arizona Cardinals. So really, that's where we got to have this conversation. If you're talking about trading up for a player, you're not looking to trade up to the pick, right? You're not going to look to trade to number 16 with the Arizona Cardinals unless you're going to jump the Miami Dolphins. Instead, you're looking at jumping up to like number 15 to get ahead of the Miami Dolphins, who are looking to trade up to number 16, right? So you either got to outbid somebody or get ahead of them, things like that. So Jayden Barron, look, could I justify paying what it's going to take to get up to number 16 from 29? I don't think so. As much as I love Jayden Barron as a player prospect, I don't think so. I think it's a little too rich. Number 17 is edge Michael Williams, or Mikel Williams out of Georgia. I think there's the injury concerns me. There's some other things there. I don't know you pay that ransom. Wide receiver Tet McMillan goes number 18 out of Arizona to the Seattle Seahawks in this one. And the Seahawks are known, guys. The Seahawks are known for trading back in the NFL draft. And I will tell you, if Tet McMillan is there at number 18, you make that phone call. Now, I don't know if you end up paying the price. I don't know if you end up going up and doing it, but Tet McMillan is tall. He's long. He's got range. He's got the ability to get downfield. He's got the ability to climb the ladder. This is the kind of dude that is missing from this Washington Commanders roster's receiver room. Talk about Terry McLaurin, Deebo Samuel, Tet McMillan, Noah Brown, Luke McCaffrey. I mean, that is a solid 5-man group of receivers there before you even get to anybody else. So I think you definitely make the call. Wide receiver Emeka Egbuka is there at number 20 going to the Dallas Cowboys. Again, the Cowboys aren't going to trade back with you. Well, I guess I can't say never, but they're more likely to take Emeka than trade back so you can. Running back Marion Hampton at number 21 to UNC. If Adam Peters thinks he's a true blue Commander and you just love the dude, go up and get him. Wide receiver Matthew Golden, number 23 out of Texas to the Green Bay Packers, is another interesting prospect. Azariah Thomas, out of the cornerback out of Florida State. Personally, I don't think he's a trade-up candidate, but I know a lot of people love him. He was at number 24 to the Bills in a trade with the Vikings. So if the Vikings are looking to move out, maybe you move up 5 spots. That certainly is going to cost you less. And that's where we kind of get here. Reuter has the Eagles moving up with the Rams at 26 to get defensive tackle Walter Nolan out of Ole Miss. He's an option. Tyler Booker, interior offensive lineman, who just a couple weeks ago was getting like top 10 buzz from some people. Now he's at number 27 to the Chiefs, who traded back or traded up with the Ravens. Certainly, if the Ravens are willing to trade to the Chiefs, they would also be willing to trade to the Commanders. Let's move back just a little bit. Now, the Commanders in this mock draft get edge Mike Green out of Marshall at 29. The thing about Mike Green is he was dismissed from Virginia, suspended, ended up leaving Virginia, if I understand correctly. Did have some sexual assault allegations in his past. None of them have been founded. He's never been criminally charged. That's something he pointed out in the NFL Scouting Combine. But teams tend to kind of stay away from that kind of stuff in the first round. So I don't know that Mike Green is really the kind of fit there that you're looking at. And then at number 29, guys still on the board, safety Malachi Starks out of Georgia. Wide receiver Isaiah Bond out of Texas, who ran a really good 40 and looks like a really good open space. You talk about that Kliff Kingsbury screen game. You put Deebo Samuel on one side, Isaiah Bond on the other side. I don't know how you defend that as a defense. Defensive tackle Derek Harmon out of Oregon, who's one of my favorite guys in this year's late first round area. Cornerback Trey Amos out of Ole Miss, another corner. I actually like Trey Amos for the Commanders more than I like Azariah Thomas. Edge rusher JT Tuimoloau, who you guys know everydayers know I'm really high on, more of a second round guy, right? So if you look at the talent available, are there players worth trading up for? Yeah, I think so. I think there's a few here. Again, Tet McMillan out of Arizona. Matthew Golden out of Texas, certainly if you want him. Marion Hampton, if the Commanders just think he's that next, like Saquon Barkley, not stylistically, but next running back to take the league by storm. Offensive guard, interior offensive lineman Tyler Booker at 27. I mean, look, if he's sitting there at 27 and they're ever say, hey, we're willing to jump back to 29 with you, but there's a team behind you calling up as well, you might pull the trigger on that thing. You know what I mean? But then also you could trade back and look to get an Isaiah Bond, a Derek Harmon, a Trey Amos, JT Tuimoloau if they do slip. So there's a lot of ifs, ands, or buts, but there's also a lot of options, right? So what you need, if you're a Commanders fan, while you're watching day one, you need some of those head-scratching picks. You need 3 quarterbacks to come off the board. You need two or three tight ends. You need that D tackle that everybody thought was the second rounder to go off the board the first round. And look, maybe he's going to be successful in that team. Great. But you need a guy that the Commanders aren't going to target to come off the board ahead of 29 to make that good talent that the Commanders could target slide all the way back. So very good mailbag questions here. We still have some more mailbag questions to get through, and we will do that during next week. But coming up next, our next episode will be our next mock draft Monday. And I'm actually going to kind of fold one of these questions. What happens if the Commanders do look to continue replacing previous regime players with this year's draft class? We're going to prioritize doing that in our next mock draft Monday. That's our next episode of Locked On Commanders. So make sure you're coming through for that. If you want to submit questions for future mailbag episodes, all you got to do is become an insider to do that. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. You text me, I text you. It's a lot of fun. And I want to give a special thank you to those insiders who are continuing to sign up as we get through this offseason. Hopefully you're enjoying it. There's going to be a lot more once we get into the season as well, but hopefully you're also enjoying what you're getting during the offseason. I want to thank you for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day every day. For your next one, check out the Locked On NFL Draft podcast. And as always, everydayers, thank you for coming through every single day. And to everybody, until we speak again, if you're out and about, please be safe, be kind to one another. And I'll see you right back here next time for another episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.